back, everybody. Today is Tuesday, August 18th. We are now 77 days away from the elections in November. The United States Senate, United States House, governorship, and presidential elections continue to heat up more and more and more. And we are now, as of tonight, midway through the Democratic Virtual Convention that was, of course, set to take place in Milwaukee. As you would imagine, that's kind of a bad break for the Democrats. Typically campaigns like to put themselves in swing states. Obviously, Wisconsin fits that bill, but the Democrats are having to do it virtually. So now that we are through the second of 4 nights of the convention, let's get to our next presidential election video. We will also be answering a couple questions from commenters because of a certain legal issue involving YouTube. I will not be able to address you by name, but I will be able to answer your questions directly. We will do that as it is appropriate over the course of the video when it makes sense with a particular thing that I'm breaking down. So let's go as we always do, Westies. So in the state of Hawaii, pretty safe Democratic state. There's no reason to believe that the Democrats are in any problems here. Obviously, there were some photos of that Hawaiians for Trump rally that circulated around social media, but that's not really indicative of anything. I mean, you can find Democrats in Wyoming, if you looked hard enough. So nothing to really discuss there. In the state of Alaska, as we've broken down many times, the independence of Al Gross in the United States Senate is not giving him much traction against Dan Sullivan. However, this state is speaking louder and louder to Donald Trump's unpopularity, as well as Lisa Murkowski's unpopularity nationally. Donald Trump, it is possible that Joe Biden is going to be able to come within 4 or 5 points of Donald Trump in this state. Now, I am ready now to officially, for the first time on this channel, only characterize this as a lean. And that is because first of all, Alaska is a very difficult state to poll. And what we've seen over the years is that this is a state kind of similar to North Dakota, where, Heidi Heitkamp and the Democrats, Kent Conrad, were able to win elections despite losing in a number of polls. Now, why is that? It's because Republicans are often overstated in states where the polling is very difficult to do. We've maybe seen that a little bit in Montana, just as we saw that in North Dakota, and we're seeing potentially here in Alaska. Now, does that mean that Dan Sullivan is necessarily being overstated against Al Gross, and is Don Young in the House race? We don't really know, but I expect Joe Biden to do pretty well in this state, just as he and Barack Obama did back in 2008. So I have this now as a lean characterization for the first time on this channel. Washington's safe state. The racial protests that we're seeing going on there, as we know, that whole dynamic is only going to help one political party, and it's not the Republican Party. Same thing in Oregon, with everything going on in Portland, as if the Democrats needed any kind of boost in Oregon, which they certainly don't. They're going to be just fine here. Same kind of deal in California, where Kamala Harris is going to make this state even safer than it already is. We saw that tweet from Mike Huckabee, the former governor of Arkansas and the former presidential candidate back in 2008, who, it's long been established now that Huckabee has, how should we put this? He has devolved, let's put it, into a world in which his commentary is of the sort of satirical nature and of the sarcastic and humorous type, and he tweeted just the other day when Joe Biden made his selection for vice president that it gave, I'm paraphrasing here, that it gave Joe Biden a 50-50 chance to win the state of California. On Joe Biden's absolute worst day, even if he picked Kevin McCarthy to be his vice presidential running mate, Joe Biden would win this state by 20 points. I think with Kamala Harris on the ballot, that it's possible Joe Biden could win the state of California by almost 35 points. So keep an eye on that. We could see some records set in San Francisco and San Jose. In the state of Nevada, we've broken this down many, many times, how this state has shifted further and further to the left in recent elections. Catherine Cortez Masto is really generating some buzz for the Democrats. The party is very, very jazzed about her potentially getting her name more into some national discussions. She was on some initial shortlists for the vice presidential pick considerations. Whatever the Democrats have a different name for it, but whatever the RNSC is, I guess it's a DNSC, but I think they have a different name for it. The Democratic Senatorial Committee, that entity, she is the chair of. And her, along with Jackie Rosen, now the other senator, they're both senators similar to the state of Washington and in California. They're both Democrats. They're both women. And of course, the Democrats also have the governorship now. We saw the mayor, or was it the congresswoman from Las Vegas in that district down here in the southern portion of the state who officially awarded the majority of the delegates in the state of Nevada to Joe Biden tonight on the second night of the convention. So all that is to say that even though it could end up being a likely margin, and remember, this is one of those states that was actually quote unquote wrong in the polls because Donald Trump led by 1 point here. But, even back in 2004, 2000, all those years ago, Harry Reid being in charge of things, it's pretty clear where this state is going right now. This is going to be a safe Democratic state. Idaho, we've discussed how we are seeing some of the first heartbeats for the Democratic Party here. They kind of have a pulse here now because the city of Boise is growing little by little. And obviously, if there's really only one urban area in a state, it's going to, obviously urban areas tend to vote Democratic, and if it grows to a certain amount, that could impact the entire state. For the first, the Democrats now have a Democratic mayor elected of the city of Boise. Some of their candidates have managed to get 38, 39%, starting to creep up to that 40% mark, which is sort of the mark you need to hit to, kind of make it a respectable race at least. And they're starting to get there. Paula Jordan, African-American candidate from Idaho, who's generated some national buzz. But obviously on the presidential level, we're not going to discuss that. That's going to be called right at poll closing hour. Utah, we've discussed how this margin could be closer than some may expect because we think that the Mitt Romney factor could be in play here potentially. He is beloved in this state. He has basically endorsed Joe Biden without really coming out and saying it, although it's pretty clear he's definitely not going to vote for Donald Trump. Ben McAdams was able to win this House seat here in the Salt Lake City area. He may well lose it this time around, but Mia Love was defeated back in 2018. That was a big House pickup for the Democrats. And we have seen out in the state of Utah, a number of voters are willing to go to that third-party candidate, which is what we saw. I mean, Evan McMullin got 1 out of every 5 votes back in 2016 from the state of Utah. So the margin could be closer, but of course that's not to say that this isn't on the presidential level a completely safe state. All right, in the state of Arizona, this is starting to become worrisome for the Democrats, remarkably. If I had said this is starting to become worrisome, 6 months ago, you would have said, well, obviously it's for the Republican Party. Arizona's a red state. It's the John McCain state. Well, it is, but for the better part of a year now, we have seen how the state of Arizona has slowly, more and more, kind of shifted leftward. And why is that? Well, several reasons. First of all, there are more Democrats in the state, in the United States House of Representatives, than there are Republicans. The Democrats picked up that Senate seat with Kyrsten Sinema defeating Martha McSally. And now Martha McSally was foolishly appointed to the other seat that was vacated by Jon Kyl in lieu of John McCain by the governor, Doug Ducey. That was the worst move that Doug Ducey could have made for his party, seeing as Martha McSally is deeply disliked and is being challenged by Mark Kelly, who is the veteran, the former astronaut, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords. However, all those things considered, even with Joe Biden leading, the polls have begun to narrow over the last month in the state of Arizona. And the most recent poll in the Senate had Mark Kelly actually tied with Martha McSally at 48% all. Now, that does tell you kind of what the state of the race is when it's a good day if you're tying for the first time in a long time. But the same pollster also had Donald Trump up by 3 percentage points. That's the second time in the last 6 weeks that Donald Trump has won a poll in the state of Arizona. He's still down here, and if I were a betting man, I would still have some money down on the Democrats eking out the state of Arizona. So right now, I've typically had this as lean, but right now we are seeing some signs of the Republicans recovering here. I still have it for the Democrats, but I'm downgrading this for them to just a tilt. Now, in the state of Montana, the Republicans are also doing a pretty darn good job here as well. I'm going to turn the brightness down here. Why? Well, there are so many statewide races happening here this time. Matt Rosendale is defeating Kathleen Williams on the House level. Steve Daines is defeating Steve Bullock on the Senate level. Greg Gianforte is defeating Mike Cooney on the governorship level. And of course, on the presidential level, this state is never that close to begin with. And this time is really no exception. So, there's really no reason to suggest that the Democratic Party is, going to have any kind of success in this state this time around. And That's troubling for them because this was a Senate seat that they were very, very bullish on with Steve Bullock, and they still have obviously a real chance to win there. But remember, there hasn't been a Republican governor of the state of Montana since 2000. Think about that. So the Republicans are going to finally flip this around, and on the presidential level, it's obviously going to go that way. Same in Wyoming. In the state of Colorado, on the presidential level, again, there's not much to discuss here. Obviously, there's still Cory Gardner here in the Senate, but the Democrats have obviously proven that even though most prognosticators, most evaluators still label Colorado as a swing state, the reality is it really isn't a swing state anymore. The Democrats were able to consecutively elect a Democratic governor, replacing John Hickenlooper with Jared Polis, and now they're about to elect John Hickenlooper again. Only this time to the Senate, as he is challenging Cory Gardner. The Democrats could not have nominated a better person to challenge Cory Gardner. He is extremely popular, John Hickenlooper, that is. He's kind of a moderate Democrat, a conservative Democrat, and that is going to go such a long way towards helping the Democrats flip the Senate. And on the presidential level, I'm labeling it safe. In the state of New Mexico, it's also going to be safe. Some people still label this a swing state as well. But given what we're seeing also on the Senate level, Ben Ray Lujan, the representative, is running for an open Senate seat there, and he is easily defeating his opponent. It's pretty clear what's going to happen here on the presidential level as well. North Dakota, we talked about it earlier, but it's going to be safe. South Dakota, we've outlined how this is, the state Democratic Party does a great job, and how in 2008 it was not called right away at poll closing hour, but not on the presidential level. Same in Nebraska, safe state. Kansas, obviously keep an eye on it, on that Senate race, because Barbara Bollier, the former Republican, is giving a pretty good fight to Roger Marshall. But after Chris Kobach lost in the primary, the Democrats' hopes of picking up that seat appear to have, somewhat dashed, although they still have a shot there. Oklahoma, Ruby Red. All right, now in Texas, Donald Trump got a big sigh of relief when the most recent poll had Donald Trump leading Joe Biden by a far more considerable margin than he had at really any point throughout the campaign season, and certainly more than Joe Biden had ever led. And that had the poll was conducted by Rice University, which is a very respected pollster. It was a small sample size, but it had Trump up by 7%. So that basically, and it also had John Cornyn up by 7% against N.J. Hager, the Democratic Senate candidate. So that tells you the state of this race. I still have a tilt Republican because we've seen evidence to suggest that the Democrats could win the state, but that's where it stands right now. Minnesota, it's a safe state. The Democrats did a great job in the midterms there. It's going to hold that way. Iowa, I'm going to label it lean Republican. On the Senate level, pay attention there. Teresa Greenfield is leading Joni Ernst right now. Okay, don't overlook that. She's also raising a ton of money. The Democrats are very optimistic that she can flip that seat. But on the presidential level, it's going to be too big a recovery from the margin that we saw back in 2016. Missouri, always one of those states that the Democrats are a little bit underrated in. And again, I have mentioned how there are those studies that have shown that if like all of St. Louis was in Missouri and not half in Illinois, and all of Kansas City was in Missouri and not half in Kansas, it could actually end up being a blue state. But on the presidential level, I'm going to label it likely because that's probably the ultimate margin. Arkansas, nothing to talk about. Louisiana, nothing to talk about. In the state of Mississippi, the Democratic Party continues to slowly make progress here. Mike Espy is giving it another shot against Cindy Hyde-Smith. He's not going to win that seat. He knows it too. He could, maybe come within 3-4 points if he really does well. But that's probably the best case scenario for the Democrats here. On the presidential level, keep an eye on the final margin here because the minority turnout is going to be high in this election, as we know. And Mississippi is the highest minority population state in the country. So I'm going to label it likely, mostly by a margin characterization. Alabama, safe state. Doug Jones is going to lose to Tommy Tuberville. That's a virtual certainty. In the state of Georgia, now the Democrats are still pretty optimistic that they can get this thing done here. Another YouGov poll that was released today had Trump leading Biden by 2 points there. He needs this state if he wants to have any shot. If he loses Georgia, he's pretty much toast. The Democrats have generated buzz in the state between Stacey Abrams and Keisha Lance Bottoms. However, in both Senate races that are up, because there's one special election, one regular election, they didn't really field the ideal candidate there. Jon Ossoff, who was, at the scene of the most expensive House race in U.S. history, real on in Donald Trump's term, he lost that race. He was also in a poll that was released today, tied with David Perdue, so keep an eye on that. And then in the state Senate special election, that is obviously going to be a safe one for the Republicans. So I'm going to label this tilt Republican. Florida. The Democrats continue to see good momentum here. Another Republican lost his race. I'm forgetting who it is now, but it's in a primary just today. Today's Tuesday, election day, and a current Republican representative lost that primary. So that's the 8th different Republican to lose since 2018, I believe, or I believe since 2018. But on the presidential level, especially seeing that Donald Trump's not going to get a convention bump from having anything, in person in Jacksonville, combined with deep unpopularity for the governor there, Ron DeSantis. The Democrats managed to flip some House districts in 2018. Yes, they lost the governorship race. They also lost the senatorial race. But the polling that we're seeing has me labeling this lean Democrat. South Carolina, safe Republican state. Keep an eye on it in the Senate level, because Jamie Harrison is starting to make some real noise and make up some ground on Lindsey Graham. Tennessee, safe Republican state. North Carolina, I'm going to still label this tilt Democrat, but barely, because Donald Trump is holding his head above water in this state. It's just that I think everything else that we're seeing in this state, between Roy Cooper, the very popular Democrat governor, he is up for re-election. He is easily defeating his challenger, Dan Forest. Cal Cunningham is defeating Thom Tillis. On the senatorial level, there are also a couple House districts that are up this time around that the Democrats are expected to flip from red to blue. So all that is what I think is going to push turnout for Joe Biden. Kentucky, nothing's going to happen there. Same in West Virginia, and then Virginia is a safe Democratic state. Same in Illinois, safe state. Indiana, safe Republican state. Ohio, I'm going to label this tilt Republican because it's similar to Iowa in that there's definitely going to be a shift leftward this time around, but I just don't exactly see how the Democrats can make up that much ground. Sherrod Brown, of course, did win in 2018, but Mike DeWine also was able to win back in 2018, keeping the governorship for them, and his approval ratings are sky high right now. Wisconsin, I'm labeling this lean Democrat. Because we've seen so much evidence suggesting that the Democrats are going to win this state. Okay, they won the governorship back. They defeated Scott Walker. That's really notable. Tammy Baldwin was able to win re-election to the United States Senate by 11 percentage points, 55 to 44. The state Senate special election flipped from red to blue in the southern portion of the state back real early, I believe, in Trump's first year in office. That constituted it being the first time in decades that a Democrat represented that district. And don't forget that Supreme Court race in Wisconsin that the Democrats won, despite only 5 polling locations being open in the city of Milwaukee. Michigan, the Republicans have basically waved the white flag here. Keep an eye on John James speaking at the RNC. But he's also pretty much dead in the water when it comes to trying to defeat Gary Peters, the incumbent Democratic senator. The Republicans have pulled their ads out of this state. Remember, Gretchen Whitmer also flipped the governorship from red to blue. Debbie Stabenow defeated John James, of course, back in 2018. The Democrats really shouldn't be that concerned right now with Michigan. They can't be as complacent as they were, but they should feel confident. D.C., most liberal area in the country. Maryland, right there with it, even though it has a Republican governor. Delaware, easy. New Jersey, easy retention for the Democrats. Connecticut, I've talked about its potential long-term ramifications, but easy right now. Rhode Island, easy. Massachusetts, as we know, pay attention to that Senate primary, but it's going to be fine. And there it is, already over the 270 mark for Joe Biden. And in Pennsylvania, it's Scrappy Scranton Joe, as we know, and this has been a consistent state for him. I have this as a likely. So even though I talked about the things kind of narrowing up, really we've only seen it in 2 states, North Carolina and Arizona. And then, of course, some things on the Senate level that we'll break down in our next video. New York, safe Democratic state, as we know. Vermont, safe state. Keep an eye on New Hampshire just a little bit because it still is officially a swing state. But right now, it's a safe state, let's be honest. I mean, the reality is the Republicans have basically lost any hope of winning this state on the presidential level. They really only have had success here they've had some success on the senatorial level, which was remarkable for them, but they also still have a very popular governor here, Chris Sununu, who could potentially challenge Maggie Hassan, a vulnerable Democrat, in 2022. And then in Maine, I'm still going to give this 1 vote here to Donald Trump, barely, but I'm still going to give it to him, and I'm not going to give Joe Biden that 1 vote in Nebraska, because I think that turnout amongst the white suburban voters is still going to be high enough to give him this 1 vote. So I know I said I would answer some of those questions for you. So one question that we saw in the thread was about potentially overstating the fact that Joe Biden is simply leading a little bit in the polls, and that polls were the polls were a little bit wrong in 2016, and we've seen many candidates lose after being ahead in the polls. Here's what I will say to that. The reality is the polls, again, were not really wrong in 2016. There were 4 states that were a little bit incorrect, one of which, of course, was expected to go to Trump that ended up going to Hillary. And Wisconsin, as we've broken down many times, was really the only state that we saw a big shift from one win to the other. Hillary Clinton led by almost 7 points on election day and lost. That was just a complete, shell shocker right there. So that's number one. Number two, yes, Michael Dukakis famously led Ronald Reagan. We get that. George Bush. But the reality is back then, polling was so different, and the 24-hour media news coverage was not feeding into people's anxieties, into people's concerns quite as much, and voters were so much more fluid back then. There were far more independent voters. There were far more voters that weren't so beholden to a certain party and a certain faction like we see now. And then finally, what I'll say is this. We have really not seen an incumbent president in this poor a polling position really ever, okay? I mean, think about it this way. Donald Trump is basically akin to the situation Cory Gardner is in right now in Colorado. You just ask 10 political scientists and experts who's going to win that Senate race, Cory Gardner or John Hickenlooper. 9 out of 10 would tell you John Hickenlooper, and 1 out of 10 would be a complete buffoon. Just based off the polling, the data, the history of the elections in this state. And right now, Donald Trump's unpopularity, combined with Joe Biden's steady popularity, combined with a very, very high expected minority turnout, is going to push things for the Democrats. Also combined with the fact that the Republicans are basically just handing Michigan over to the Democrats on a silver platter. Another question we had is, is Donald Trump's racist, these aren't my words, this is just from the commenter, are his racist comments actually going to drive turnout on the right? Now listen, it's not my job to say whether or not I agree that they're quote unquote racist. What I will say is this, you don't have to, disclaim, everything about what your political affiliations are, in order to simply set, what I'm basically getting at is you can say something is homophobic, misogynistic, sexist, racist, without disclosing any certain political beliefs. I have political beliefs. I have a certain ideology. I align with certain politicians, certain candidates on a myriad of things. But one thing I certainly, believe in, is equality. And yes, I mean, it is no secret that what we have seen from President Trump, what we have seen from a number of his allies in the media, in Congress, what have you, have engaged in dialogue, in antics that can be perceived as dog whistles. You really can. Some would say it's more overt than that. And they have a case, for that as well. Now, obviously, the Democratic Party has been much louder about quote unquote equality and systemic racism than the right has. Different parties are louder and softer about different things. The right is much louder about patriotism and the military. Now, obviously, that's going to wane on the Republican Party quite a lot when they constantly feel that the left and the Democrats are playing the race card, as they put it. But the reality is, it's just kind of a fact. There's really no way around that. Okay, this is this channel is not MSNBC and it's not Fox News. Okay, this is a fair, just balanced and honest depiction of where the polling is and where the state of these races are. And to answer that commenter directly, yes, the answer is yes. I think that those specific things have alienated certain voters, moderates, people that have participated in elections in the past. The problem is, though, for the Democrats at least, is that a large portion of the country voted for Donald Trump that had never voted in an election in their lives, had never participated in the democratic process in their lives. And as a result, they see the kind of pushback that we're seeing from the Democrats, the kind of, the hashtag resistance, the whole thing. And Nancy Pelosi on TV all the time, Chuck Schumer, the whole deal. And so they see that without any prior knowledge of that's kind of how things work. When one party has the White House and another has a certain body of Congress, there's going to be, a gnashing of teeth there. And certainly Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have locked horns with Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, and far more than it even happened back under the Obama days. Going against Mitch McConnell and John Boehner, which is saying something. So people are often shell shocked at the kind of quote unquote obstruction and resistance that they see from the Democratic Party. And so those people are ever more motivated to go back to the polls because they think it's unprecedented and they think it's ridiculous and they think it's childish and juvenile of the Democrats and moderate Republicans and never Trump Republicans and the Lincoln Project and Republican voters against Donald Trump and all these groups that have sprung up. People think it really is an effort to undermine their choice for who they voted for and such. So that's sort of my long-winded way of saying, yes, I think it will drive turnout on the Republican Party side, even though it has alienated some voters for sure. So thank you guys so much for watching. There's your final map, 333 to 205. Notice how I did say it is narrowing up, but Joe Biden still thoroughly has the lead here. So thank you guys so much again for watching. We'll make a post-Senate election, post-convention video. Will also be coming out with a new Senate election prediction video pretty soon. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.